reduce waste and save money with these 5 recipes that work perfectly for using up stale bread. If you are someone who bakes bread, whether sourdough or standard yeast breads, you know they go stale pretty quickly since there are no preservatives. But even if you don't bake your own bread, you can save the end pieces of store-bought bread we often throw out in the freezer and use any one of these recipes to make sure it doesn't go to waste. I bake a lot of sourdough bread weekly and often have little end pieces left over from various loaves. These are my favorite ways to use up any leftover stale bread I have, because these random pieces of leftover bread are great for quick meals, starting with strata, a simple bread and egg mixture. Now you can make a strata in a pan like I'm doing here, or you can bake it in a casserole dish. I will link my ham and cheese strata recipe below the video. It's a great one to prep the night before baking. For this strata, I began by sauteing the stale bread cubes. Then I add onion, mushrooms, and a little spinach for color. I like to add some herbs and salt and pepper for seasoning. Stratas are great for easy dinners or quick lunches, and of course, breakfast. After everything's cooked, I pour over the eggs and just toss it until they're cooked through. Since there's already bread in the strata, it's a pretty hearty dish, so I don't find any need to add any sort of side dish to them. They're a complete meal in one. And they're great to top with salsa. French onion soup seems complicated, but it's actually quite simple to make. I will link a great French onion soup recipe below. Essentially, I start by toasting my stale bread, and you can add 1 or 2 slices depending on the size of your soup bowl and the bread that you are using. I'm going to use 1 good sized slice for mine. I add a little bit of olive oil and I bake them at 350 degrees until they're nice and toasty. For the soup itself, I caramelize a few onions that I cut into long strips. It is important to cook the onions until they are caramelized and not just sauteed. I add a little sugar, salt, pepper, and dried thyme to them as they cook. When the onions are nice and golden brown, I add beef stock and some dried sherry. And once that flavor is developed in the broth, I remove it from the heat and ladle it into my bowls. I then place the toasted stale bread inside, and I top it with Gruyere cheese, or I mix the provolone and Swiss cheese. Then I bake it until it's nice and bubbly. I make a lot of crostini in our house. Topping toast is such a fun way to make a quick meal that you can pretty much use whatever you like, and stale bread is perfect for making crostinis. These I cut a little thicker, but they still work. For this crostini, I am using cream cheese and smoked salmon, and I'm just topping it with a sprinkle of everything bagel seasoning. Hummus, smashed avocado, and bruschetta are also great to use for this. This is one of the most popular recipes on my entire site, which surprised me because it's such an easy and quick one. I'll make sure to link it in the description box if you would like the exact recipe. I start by cubing stale bread, and I make an egg batter of melted butter, eggs, milk, cinnamon, and vanilla. I mix and pour it over, and I allow the bread cubes to absorb that, and so I allow it to sit. Especially if you have bread that is very hard, you can let this sit overnight in the fridge in the bowl if you'd like. And once it has absorbed most of the batter, I pour it into a baking dish or cast iron pan, and then I sprinkle the top with a bit of cinnamon and sugar, and then I bake it until it's golden brown. Lastly, and quite simply, we have homemade croutons, which if you've never made homemade croutons before, just know once you make them yourself, you will never want those store-bought blocks again. You can make these up in a skillet or bake them to crisp them up and use whatever herbs or seasoning you like, but make sure to add some olive oil so they are crisp and not overly hard or dried out. I will link a variation of homemade croutons below the video with the rest of the recipes I have mentioned today. And with these croutons, that completes my recipe list for using up that stale bread. I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one.